First, there was only darkness. Then light. This is creation. This is the story of life. It is the story of this podcast. Right now we travel through the birthing canal to emerge innocent into a new world. You, the listener, are truly blessed, for you are along for the journey. Welcome!
Kabloosh.
Kabloosh indeed, Max.
It's a little dramatic.
You're a little dramatic. All right, so you, the listener, if you could not creak your chair as much, Isaac.
We need to figure that out. Yeah, okay.
We just need to get new chairs. Yeah. You, the listener, when you clicked on this podcast, you know the name of it. And right now, the three of us around this table, I'm going to point to you and say your name.
Max.
Isaac.
Jamison. I did point at myself. You're going to have to trust me, listener. I did do that because that's what I'm about. We don't know the name of this podcast. We don't know what it's about, what it's going to do, and how it functions. You might say to yourself, that sounds like you guys came really prepared for a thing you wanted to do.
Sorry, what was that word you just said?
I said paired, and then I did fix it. I did fix it.
If you say so.
You might say you guys sound like you don't know what you're doing. And you'd be right. But that's the process here, folks. That's what it's all about. It's about finding yourself. It's about finding identity. And that's what we're going to do in today's episode. We're going to name this podcast.
Yep.
We're going to find our identity. And then we're going to, I don't know.
Have we been birthed yet, by the way?
We've been birthed. The opening was the birth.
Just making sure.
That was the birth.
Okay.
The epic music stopped like 30 seconds ago, so
okay.
Yeah.
We're done with that.
Yeah, just making sure.
Birth is over. We're now in kind of the...
Can we just drop the metaphor,
we're lying
please?
down on the bed, still covered in our own blood and feces, fecal matter from the birthing process.
I literally might take this out.
I believe that's just called afterbirth. And that's where we're at right now.
Yeah.
This is not what I signed up for.
Well, I mean,
Believe
no one
it or not.
signs up to be alive. But here we are.
Okay. We've actually been talking about doing a podcast for a lot longer than the pandemic.
Yes.
I've found that people have been taking this up, which this is also the case with us. People have been taking this opportunity to do podcasting and all of those
video work
and like
making
things,
music.
the trendy stuff.
All the things everyone wanted to do, but convinced themselves they didn't
and also
have
making
time
your own
for.
sourdough starter.
Yeah, I hear that a lot. That's a bit of a meme nowadays, isn't it?
That was over like a month ago. What has everyone moved on to at this point, other than podcasting? Like we ourselves are so perfectly exemplifying.
Yeah, I mean we're just riding a trend, are we not?
I suppose.
I hope not. I really think, we have been talking about doing this for a long time. And, I do think that it's more than just our boredom that is bringing us to do the podcast. Yeah. But I think that helps for sure.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with riding a trend. I don't mind. I think people act like if you're doing anything that anyone else is doing for some reason, you're less than or you're being derivative. And I don't care. I'm all for it. Let's be as derivative as we want to be.
If anything, it makes you more popular.
I'm going to just rip off another podcast in this episode. We're going to word for word.
Yeah.
Read another podcast.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna actually first name idea This American Life, but it's spelled differently.
How? What word is spelled differently?
I'm thinking all of them.
Okay.
I'm thinking like THEESAM.
It would have been easier if you'd written this out before.
AMARHICANLYFE. This American Life. This American Life. Which sounds like how a Russian nesting agent would pronounce that. This American life. No offense to any Russian nesting agents out there. We support you.
Yes.
Man, thank goodness that you're joking. That would be the worst thing ever.
Before we get into the names, and continuity, if that's the right word, with what we're doing here about identity, I wanted us to talk about ourselves for a little bit to acclimate you, the viewer, to who we are as people.
This is, in fact, a video podcast.
Yes.
Yes.
Wait, what?
Yes.
You are viewing this podcast.
What did I say, viewer?
No, you definitely didn't. Keep going.
I'm going to point at you, and I want you to talk about yourself.
What's with the pointing?
I like to point.
How about you go first?
Okay.
That's a lot of pressure.
Jamison.
Fine. My name's Jamison, not Jamison, as Max pointed out.
Very popularly known for his Bored with Jamison podcast.
Which had
Alive
2 episodes.
Alive and Dead.
It had
a short lifespan.
Yeah, but that podcast is what gave us the idea to come together and make one of our own. Because I before this, I was trying to make my own podcast, which is difficult to do by yourself, because as it would turn out, talking to yourself for an hour is not only boring, but difficult to keep lively, which is the same thing. I think I just said it differently 2 ways there. And that's something about me, is I just say things. And that'll be my defining characteristic on this podcast, is saying things without thinking about them first, and then analyzing why I said those things.
As you're doing right now?
Yes, in a very pedantic manner. And that's sort of me as a person, is action and then reflection on that action afterwards. And that's kind of me as a human.
Perfect.
Wonderful.
Max, you want to talk about you?
All right. I'm Max.
Yeah, you are.
I'm the guy that likes the Beatles, you know.
The only one.
I am that guy.
Yeah.
You know how it is. Let's see.
It's okay.
Is that it?
I'm the Beatles guy.
I feel like there's more about you, but I guess we can
try,
explore that later on.
Yeah.
You can talk about your interests beyond the Beatles.
Movies are pretty dope, you know.
Movies and the Beatles.
The movies and the Beatles, and like video games. Those are pretty cool too. And
I like.
Books are pretty cool too.
I am Max, and I like media.
Specifically the Beatles.
Specifically media made by the Beatles and then other human media.
That's a pretty good bet, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Isaac?
Yeah. My name's Isaac Hopwood. I am a runner.
Nice.
And I also enjoy media, if that's what we're talking about.
Ooh.
Yurt.
But not exclusively Beatles media.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, I became close friends with you guys probably primarily through our interest in cinema and terrible cinema.
Yes,
and
cinema weird, which was a thing we used to do.
And great cinema.
Yeah.
And just it's really fun, and the most of our conversations where we've talked about movies have been the conversations where we've been like, man, we need to start a podcast.
Yeah.
Right? I wish we could have been recording this conversation. And so, that's what we're doing now. I don't know if we'll land on movies. I don't know if we'll land on anything, but
yeah.
When it comes to identity as like a thing, I feel like the things we like and the media we enjoy actually make up who we are as people. Yeah. So I don't think that's wrong to say that we as friends grew to know each other through the things we like. Mm-hmm. And also, I think people say that people tend to identify with the things they like. Some people, you would say, they identify too much with those things. People who, are all decked out in Rick and Morty gear for the day and saying stuff like wubba lubba dub dub. You're just thinking, you're looking at that person and be like, all right, maybe dial it back by 1,000.
I remember heard it I had a friend named Chandler that kind of described the idea whenever someone asks you who you are, there's never really a way that you can describe who you actually are as a person. You can't describe your personality in words. So instead you have to give them tangible things I like running, I like movies, but none of those in per se really define who you are as a person. If that makes sense.
Yeah. And I mean, as long as we're talking about identity, I'm always one to dig into existential and more large scale ideas. Fun. But, you know, that kind of comes down to, you know, what we choose to identify ourselves by. You know, like us as a society. In Western civilization, we are defined by what we do, right? Like we talk about what we want to do or what we want to be when we grow up, and it's always about our job, our occupation. Yeah. And so we're defined by the work that we do, and if we're not defined by the work that we do, we're defined by the things we enjoy.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's necessarily anything inherently wrong with that.
Well, I don't think there is either.
No, that's not even the point I was trying to say. I was trying to say, like, what we like comes to identify us. Like the ideas and the films and the books and stuff I've read have influenced my ideas about life. You know, and that's what media does for us, is that it helps us build a worldview. Even bad media does. You know, like people say that certain things are political and certain things aren't. Everything is political. Even if you omit something, the fact that you omitted that aspect of life is a political choice in its own way. The idea to ignore or include something. These are, you know, what shape us as people, is what we watch, what we enjoy, and what is included in those things and how it builds us into the people we are. And I think that's actually very cool in its own way. Because, you know, if it wasn't, it's terrifying.
Yeah. And, you know, it also brings into question, like, is that phenomena only something that is within the last 100 years? You know what I mean? Because it's like, while there's been media for, you know, millennia, it's really only been in the last century, that media has been at this exposure. You know what I mean? Like, has it been like so fully permeating in our lives?
I think it has to do with philosophy, sort of. Like, when did humanism come around? When did that idea of like self and
define humanism?
I will. I'm going to Google it right now.
Go ahead and Google it. Humanism has to do.
Can I hear those keyboard like click clack as like
Humanism.
That's good.
Loud as
Humanism has to do with the belief and like the belief in the goodness of humanity. You know, like the innate goodness and like potential of humanity.
So I have the definition from I believe Wikipedia or Google, that is. Humanism, noun, love that.
Whoa.
That's an idea, not a person, place, or thing. An idea, part of the noun thing.
Keep going.
Okay. An outlook of or system of thought attaching prime importance to human rather than divine or supernatural matters. Humanist beliefs stress the potential value and goodness of human beings, emphasize common human needs, and seek solely rational ways of solving human problems. So I think when you're looking into an identity, I think it's the time in people's life where they stopped thinking of themselves solely as a creation defined by their creator and as who they are as individuals. When people kind of moved away from that line of thinking, I guess. Does that make sense? The innate properties of what makes us who we are. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, not what we're talking about today, but that definitely has links back to the origin of Protestantism.
Yeah, well, right? And the Renaissance movement, which is actually a little thing down here, is the Renaissance is when humanism kind of took.
Yeah, and it has to do with, right, because I think that Protestantism has a lot to do with Western culture now, right? Yeah. Not that Western culture is very secular, but Protestantism, you know, it you know, like Catholicism was all about the system and the hierarchy and the chain of command,
right?
And Protestantism broke that down to the individual.
Yeah.
And so the world we live in now, the Western world at least, is stemmed from that place of individualism and the identity of the singular, right? And how like community is made up of many parts, right?
Yeah, it's good. And actually I would say that does influence this podcast. I wouldn't say that's off topic, because everything about us is identity. And that's not what this was supposed to turn into, with some philosophical talk about, but I'm glad it has, because now we can make a name for ourselves in this moment. And I want to do that. I want to spend some time.
Philosophers. No.
Here's the thing, guys. The first name you say can't be the one we choose. And the problem
Dang.
is because if it is, then what's the rest of this podcast episode about?
That's kind of... Well, we could always come back to it.
We can come back to it, but how lame is that? It's not that lame. That's a
Full
good
circle.
point. So, I wanted to spend some time...
I see that you have a single name on your sheet of wide-ruled paper.
Yes.
A single name.
So please indulge us with your one name.
Earlier, we decided that the sound of the air conditioning in the place we are was too loud for the podcast and would create a ton of background noise. To which you then switched off and said, it's about to get real toasty in here. And I thought, you know what's a great podcast name? Real Toasty. I even added an exclamation mark. That's optional for the name. That's optional.
That's a bad podcast
I'm actually
name.
kind of digging that.
Beautiful
I'll be
podcast
honest.
name. Real Toasty.
What does it have to do with anything?
It's about the room we're in. If our environment shapes us who we are as people,
well, I
the fact that
guess
it's
suppose
toasty
technically
here,
our environment could change over the course of this podcast.
to
be technical.
I think we should always stay toasty. I'm looking at.
Well,
I'm thinking.
I guess like imagine like we
All right.
film this in my dorm room next semester. Am I going to have to just completely turn the AC off?
Yes, I want merch that says "Real Toasty."
Okay.
So no matter what, it's always going to be hot in here.
Yeah.
So like even during the winter, when like AC is not required, it's not necessary. We're going to be like we're going to crank this up.
We have to bring in little heaters,
as hot as we possibly can.
space heaters, and we're gonna have to make it toasty.
All right. I'm looking at Urban Dictionary for the word toasty. So when someone is low-key chill, cool without trying too hard.
Ooh, guys!
I don't like that.
Guys, real toasty.
The next one is a term used to describe one's intoxication level.
Right? I can see
Which
that being for
is-
us.
Well, I mean, we are drinking
Obvious.
whiskey.
We are.
So I don't like being. I don't want to be toasty when we record this podcast. in that sense, I
You
mean,
choose
like,
comfort
do we want to
over-
be defined by like fraternity levels of drunk? Like, is that what we want our podcast to be known for?
I could see us not wanting that.
Yeah.
So
That's
let's
fair.
throw it out. What makes us who we are, and how should that be the name? Ideas.
The movie podcast.
I love it.
So just
It's so original.
the movie podcast. A name so boring that like it couldn't possibly already be taken because no one who's making a movie podcast.
I actually wouldn't be surprised if it's not taken.
Because it's so bad.
It's so bad. I wouldn't be surprised if it's not taken.
If we wanted to commentate on like that idea, we could like kind of leapfrog off it, like the terrible podcast. You know, those kind of wink, self-deprecating names for things where you're like ashamed of who you are, so you kind of tear it down in the process of creating it.
Yeah.
That could be our podcast name.
That's not fun, though.
I think it's real fun. I do it all the time in real life to myself. And I don't see why.
The real piece of crap podcast that no one's ever going to actually want to listen to because it's so terrible.
The
Podcast.
Mr. Stupid Idiot podcast, and you're stupid for listening to it. Why are you listening to it? .com.
Or it could be like, don't push on this.
Don't push on this. Are you talking about the table?
No. Like the name of the podcast.
Don't click it.
Yeah,
Don't-
don't click.
Don't listen.
Don't listen to this.
Reverse
podcast.
psychology.
For
Exactly.
the love of God, turn off your audio. Don't listen to. In fact, that's probably the best listening experience.
Yeah.
Is to turn the audio
Yeah, exactly.
off on your device.
But please
and just
keep
run
playing it.
Run it in the background.
Give us money.
Give us money. Liz clicks. Give us listens. But don't listen.
Yeah, please.
Run the podcast. Watch that little line cross the little bar move
Just do
across
it
the
while
timeline.
like do it while you sleep. You don't have to hear it.
You don't
just
have
like
to listen.
just like in fact, why don't you put it on repeat? Just like play it over and over again for the 8 hours that you're sleeping at night.
Didn't Justin
Constantly.
Bieber do this to like that song he made? That song that was terrible, Yummy. He asked people to just play it on a loop in the background on silent, just so it could get up the charts because it was so terrible.
I heard about that. I
I
think
didn't hear about that.
I think that it was a fan thing, and he got blamed for it,
Oh,
and people bashed him for it. But
that's a shame.
anyways, we're not going to do that.
That's a good point. You know what? Positive
I
emotion.
mean, I wouldn't mind it though.
You wouldn't mind. Yeah, if you
wouldn't.
want to do that, but that's not the preferable choice to listen to this podcast. We have
Or
voices.
maybe it
for a
should
reason.
be.
You're just gonna keep going at it, aren't you? Positive emotion trumps negative emotion. I believe that's a direct line from Inception, maybe. Right?
about positive and negative emotion? I don't
Yeah.
think they ever mentioned that.
They
in
do,
Inception.
because
Do they?
Hobb, or is it Cobb or Hobb?
Cobb.
Cobb. Hobbs is the character.
I think they're talking about how it like affects the dreamscape.
Well, no, it's like they're
Maybe.
debating on whether or not they're going to plant a negative inception, like your dad hates
Oh,
you
yeah,
and
yeah.
you should trump him and make your own business. But
Yeah.
instead, they make it a positive one about.
His dad wanting
Yeah.
better for him.
Yeah, which is the thing, is that's what that movie is Christopher Nolan planting an idea in your head about things. Because that movie's about filmmaking.
Dude.
It's about assembling a team,
Mhm.
going into this world you've created, and then also it talks about like what's it called? The point of disbelief. What am I trying to say here? Like when you realize something is fake or not in the film.
Yeah.
If
I haven't seen that movie in like a couple years, so I've
Right.
forgotten.
If you look at the projections in there as realizing the world is fake and then turning on the dreamer, you can see that as audiences seeing a film, realizing like
the disillusion.
the disillusion, like having that illusion taken from them and turning on the filmmaker. That film's super.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I've never watched that film with that in mind. That's really interesting.
Yeah. And that's the whole thing. That ending of that film is positive, but it's also kind of a fake positive. Because that message he gives to his dad is not a real thing. Or the message he gets from his dad, because it's an idea that's planted into his brain. And then you feel good watching Inception at the end of
Sure.
Inception. But it's all felt. It's a falsehood that is a positive that's given to you by the film. You've been incepted by the end of Inception.
Have you guys seen the limited series Devs on Hulu?
I watched the first episode.
I need to
and
watch
felt
more Hulu series.
I felt so numb after that
You
first
all-
episode. I
you
couldn't
have-
watch
okay,
the rest of it.
That series is exceptional. I mean, so it's Alex Garland.
Yeah, he wrote Annihilation and directed.
Oh,
He directed
heck
Annihilation.
yeah.
He directed Ex Machina.
Yeah.
And I think the limited series is like better for his format, kind of the long form nature of limited series allow him more space and more time to really get you into the world. It is very cool. I mean,
Is it created by him, or is it
Yeah.
just like
Yes.
okay?
I'm very into sciences and like science philosophy,
Yeah,
and
and that's
so
hard science.
yeah, and so he really goes all out in artificial intelligence and quantum physics and devs, and so I watched it with my wife, and it's still interesting to her, right? Because it's visually interesting and the story is fascinating. But to me, it was just like so much deeper because it was clear that Garland like made he did a lot of research into this field, and it's a field that currently there's so much uncertainty that for me, I was just fascinated with like, okay, what stance is he going to take concerning this very controversial scientific issue? So
it's speculative fiction.
And so I would encourage you guys to watch that. And
Also,
maybe,
Nick Offerman's fantastic in that.
yeah, Allison Pill's in it too.
Yes.
They're both incredible.
Yeah.
Now that I know it's directed by Alex Garland, I definitely will.
Oh yeah, I mean
For
he's Annihilation is one of my favorite movies of all time.
Yeah.
To be honest, like I love that.
All
movie.
of his work I've loved.
Yeah, so like it's I'm ready to dive into that.
Yeah.
Welcome once again to the Alex Garland podcast, which is now the name of this podcast.
We only talk about Alex Garland.
Wow.
What's the name? What if we name the podcast Tangent?
Okay,
Because we keep going off
I
the
can dig
tangents.
I literally, not joking.
Yeah.
Last night I was thinking about names for the podcast, and I'm also
Tangentially?
I'm also a part-time graphic designer, and so I was thinking like visually for what
Yeah.
the cover of the podcast would be, and Tangent was literally one of the names in my head.
That's
and
cool, right?
Yeah, like
I can get behind
Tangent was one of the names.
Tangential, you know?
That's too hard to say.
How about tangents? Tangents.
I feel like
I if we're gonna do any of that, I'd prefer just Tangent.
The
I like
Tangent podcast?
also.
Yeah, read that description of what a tangent is for me.
I mean, a tangent. So, I mean, just a little glimpse into my graphic design process. I'm very geometric in the way that I design things. So, a tangent is on a circle or a curve, right? A tangent is a line that is perpendicular to a point on a curve, right? So you guys are looking at these images right here.
I am now.
So a tangent is perpendicular to a point of the circle.
It's outside of the
Yeah,
circle.
and so similarly, a conversational tangent is the same idea.
Yeah.
Outside of the circle.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the fact that we were discussing...
The circle being the conversation.
Yeah, like the idea that half a second ago we were talking about names and then suddenly we got into film.
Yeah.
Like it drawed us in like this gravitational orbit we couldn't pull away from it for like an entire conversation.
Yeah. So, I don't know. Like, I really like tangent.
I have 2 columns on the paper I have here. I'm putting tangent into the good pile.
The good pile.
The good pile. Oh, and
what's the point of writing stuff in the bad pile?
Just to document it.
Just to document that
documentation.
Jamison, you've kind of
we'll put this in the description. How about that?
You've kind of come in with a pre-existing idea of one name idea for the podcast. You want to talk about what you thought about in the past?
My past podcast name was Bored with Jamison, and that was because because it was the entire episode, the entire basis of the podcast when I'm able to speak is that I get bored, and that kind of is where my creativity thrives, is in that place of boredom rather than inspiration necessarily, but like in seeking to entertain myself almost more than I want to entertain other people. I want to make things for me. And so that's what that podcast idea was just something for me. And that if other people enjoy it on the outside of that, that's great. But this is something to keep me active and to keep myself from going insane. And there's kind of an honesty to that name.
Sure.
And so when you guys wanted to join in on the podcast, I was like, we could just kind of drop the Jamison part and just make it bored. It's something that we do when we're bored. And also it fits in with the whole, I think you were kind of talking about this. I said kinda half a second ago. You were kind of talking about this earlier when you said people were bored during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And they're just searching for things to occupy their mind.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually kind of one of the purposes of a podcast, is to occupy that space in your brain that needs something to feed on, that needs to listen to. And in a time period where we're not having as much interaction,
it gives you something to think about, like the day to day.
Yeah.
You know,
the podcast can become a placebo for human interaction. Same thing as television stuff. Like I felt weird about this because in the past I've watched like a TV show like The Office or something, and I feel such an attachment to these characters that don't exist.
Yeah.
Like they are words on a paper being brought to life by usually a very talented actor. Like it's a surrogate for connection with people.
I've thought about that in the past a lot, and I think that's kind of a telltale thing of a successful, a successful story and successful world building. I mean, Rainey and I, that's my wife, we watched Avatar: The Last Airbender.
We're going to actually rename this
movie or the TV show?
We're going to rename this podcast to Isaac Talks About His Wife.
So we watched Avatar: The Last Airbender. I watched it as a kid. Rainey had never seen it.
Right.
And it's one of those shows, and there are plenty of shows like this, but it's one of those shows that just so creatively, composes this world around you that feels so real, right? And so magical.
Right.
And it's one of those things, right? You get so attached to the world itself and you get so attached to the characters in the world. But, I mean, that's even one step further from reality in the fact that it's an animated show, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, that's just like, I think that's part of what makes us human, right? Is the ability to empathize with a fictional character, right?
We're
Someone we don't
incredibly
know.
social creatures.
Yeah. And I think that's what makes stories so impactful for us, is because we can empathize.
Doing this podcast with you guys is a dopamine rush for me. Like, it's nice. Or I don't care what chemical it is, but it pops off in my brain because talking to people gives me life. Like, it's a weird thing. And I don't think I'm different in that case. I think that's part of, again, the human experience.
Yeah.
Is that we love each other. Even when we hate each other, we kind of love each other. We thrive off that hatred just as much as we do that love, because it's interaction.
Sure.
It is you looking at a face of someone and reading and using your brain, and it can be painful sometimes, but it can be beautiful and nice. And I doing this podcast, it feeds that part of me that seeks out conversation, and I think we all need that, even if you're what's the term? Introverted. Even if you're introverted, I think people seek that out. That's mostly just because people don't understand what it means to be introverted. Like people be like, introverted people don't like other people. Which is
I've
not
always
the
heard
case.
it like described as like when you like need to recharge, when you're introverted, you recharge by being with yourself.
Yeah.
But when you're extroverted, you recharge by being with people.
And I think there's a definite middle ground because
that is exactly what I am. I'm constantly in conflict with myself.
Well, yeah, because like I reach a point, because like I said, I just half a second ago, I'm going to contradict myself because I talked about how much I thrive on this. There's a point where I just want to shut down and be around nobody.
Sure.
Which is why a good podcast ends at a certain point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is the end of this podcast. It's not actually, but we got you, you stupid idiot.
All right, now.
Let's personally, like...
You against us insulting the listener?
Yeah.
Boring. What were you going to say, Max?
Personally, I always have, like, the issue of, like, knowing when I need alone time. If you know what I mean? Like,
right.
Like, I would say I'm extroverted enough to know that, like... I'm extroverted enough to, like, think that I always kind of want to be with people. But, like, I have trouble figuring out, like, in myself when I actually need alone time rather than trying to spend time with people.
Sure.
Isaac, you can confirm or deny this, but I always thought the nicest part about marriage was the fact that you can be alone and with someone at the same time. Is that true? Because, like, the idea of just being in the room with someone is kind of nice, but the idea of talking to them constantly makes me want to blow my head off.
Yeah. I think it really depends on the person. I think the experience is different for everybody, even within the relationship, right? Like, Rainey and I, our needs are different. I'm very extroverted and she's very introverted.
Right.
And so we have to learn how to respect each other's needs in that regard, in the sense that, like, if she's had to interact with people all day and I've been at home all day, if she comes home, I'm going to want to interact with her, but she's going to be ready to shut down, which is fine, right? That's what she needs. So it just comes down to, like, an understanding between the two partners. And I think, you know, I don't really know how it would be if it was any different, right? I mean, like, I haven't obviously been married to anybody else. So, but there is kind of that security of, like, being able to always be near that person, or even if it's just a phone call away, it's a sort of dependability that you can have with someone that is unlike any other type of relationship.
That's very interesting. And it leads me to suggest a new title for the podcast, Surrogate.
Without Googling it, could you define surrogate?
No.
See, I think that...
I remember when that word came up, and I saw you writing it down. I'm not sure.
No, I think it's a bad one too, but I wanted to say it anyhow.
Okay.
Because I thought maybe if I talk about it enough,
it's out there on the world now.
Here's the thing. Okay. Do you want to know what surrogacy is?
Sure, give it to me.
Surrogacy is an arrangement often supported by legal agreement whereby a woman agrees to bear a child for another person or persons who will become a child's parent after birth.
Yeah, so that's what I want us to be, is I want us to parent our listener.
Okay.
You can call me father, you out there.
And this is the full circle. Or
Papa.
This is the full circle we were talking about with the birth
Dad.
theme. The birth theme ends right here, right? We've gone full circle, and now we never have to talk about it ever again.
I disagree, because we came from a maternal source, as most people do, and now we've grown into something paternal. We are your 3 podcast dads.
Stop. No, I am not comfortable with this. That goes on the bad list. Bad list.
We'll title this bad list.
Perfect.
Now we have
Big Papa.
Certain definite.
Yeah. So okay. So one potential name, right? What you've talked about is
Tangent.
Tangent, obviously, is what we one of the big ones.
Real Toasty.
That is an option, I suppose.
I just want that merch. I want that merch that says, "I got real Toasty with my 3 podcast dads."
Oh God. Yeah. Okay. I mean, like,
none of us are fathers, by the way.
Not yet.
Yeah.
I would say we are now surrogate fathers.
That's true.
Okay.
For you, the listener. I care about you, and I love you.
Oh man. Okay. How do we feel about Tangent? I mean, like, I
feel like that's the most respectable name that we have currently.
Okay, so, but do we want that? Does Tangent kind of give off an air of intellectualism that we don't actually have? That's what I'm worried about.
I don't think it does.
But if people are coming in expecting intellectualism and then they get a little bit of goofiness, that's probably gonna, like, lighten their day. I mean, like, we are relatively uneducated about the topics we talk about, right?
Right.
We're gonna be talking about, you know, like, movies and TV and video games and books and whatever else we want to talk about, right? But we're not experts at any of these things other than consuming them passionately, you know, like loving the industries and being interested in what's coming next and interested in where we've come from. And so, you know,
being critical
of all those things as well.
And you know, we're probably less qualified than the next podcast, right? So
but we're slightly more qualified than the one before it.
Yes, that's and that's always the goal, right?
Yeah.
So I think that, you know, it and also tangent isn't like a $5 word. It's not like people don't know what it means.
It's at least a $3 word.
I would say it's probably a $3 word.
$2.75 word.
Yeah. For sure. So
if only it had a barcode.
Huh?
If only it had a barcode. Just ring it up.
We could ring it up.
Our next podcast episode will
this
be...
is a reference to the fact that Max is a cashier.
Yes. Yes. I talk about film and check people out at the grocery store.
And I like the Beatles.
I do like the Beatles, and I can also type in the codes for your watermelon.
Ooh,
wow, perfect.
He's got them watermelon codes. Ooh, I'm writing that down as a name. Watermelon
by the way, if you want to know, watermelon at Harp's grocery store is 4032.
Watermelon
4032.
What if that was the name?
Tomatoes are 3151.
What if the name of our podcast...
We have entered the realm of things that are absolutely uninteresting to anybody listening.
Uninteresting or abstract?
Uninteresting.
Green onions are 4068.
Thank you, Max. Ooh, 4068 is a great podcast name. I'm writing it down.
Well, before we move on to our next segment, can we let's get
specifically seeded watermelons are 4031.
Oh, all right, I'm writing that down as well.
So
do all fruits start with 40?
For the most part, yes.
That's interesting.
Oh, cucumbers are 4062.
Okay, so fruits and vegetables. Maybe it's just fresh products. What about meat?
Meat that has a barcode.
Okay, all right.
Yes,
that makes sense.
Who wants to get into more details about how I?
Because you don't just go into a grocery store and get a grasp like there's not just like a pile of meat sitting out that you reach into and put into a bag. You weigh it on a scale.
Jalapenos are 4693.
Great.
At this point, I'm bored of this conversation, and I am the one who is making this podcast. Like, I can't even imagine the people who actually made it this far.
Mm-hmm. I can, because
you will be the only one.
I'm the one typing in the codes while people tell me their political beliefs as I check them out. No, it's wonderful.
Oh, I bet.
That's interesting.
That doesn't sound terrible and horrendous to me at all.
So before we move on to our next segment, how do you guys feel about Tangent? Do you guys want to land on that?
I've accidentally fallen in love with it.
I totally dig it.
Okay, I mean,
I can totally get behind.
Honestly, that. I was coming into this episode expecting something like Bored with Friends or the Bored podcast or whatever, but I'm very glad that this conversation was enough to, because I mean, you said tangent, but I literally had that in my mind yesterday.
It's that great minds think alike. That's the rest of that. They think alike.
That was literally the funniest joke I've heard all of today.
Thank you, Max.
It's good. All right.
I know you mean that because you said it. I love this. I love that our identity is now... The first thing is that people understand that we're not going to stick to one thing. I like that our identity is fracturing and that it's out of the circle. We can even say outside of the box. You know,
no boxes involved.
Yeah, no boxes involved. We're out of them.
But if you're going to, please recycle them.
Yeah, thank you, Max. Max is a conservationist, environmentalist.
Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast recommends.
Wow, you said that real weird, dog.
Yeah, we're doing a segment here called Podcast Recommends. We're gonna run through what we've been reading, listening to, watching, and some recommendations for you.
We'll each throw out a recommendation of anything in particular. Nothing in particular. Or anything in particular.
Max, you want to start?
Yeah, let's get into that. First off, I'd like to recommend wearing a mask when you go out in public.
But doesn't that infringe on my rights?
Yes, it does. Please wear a mask.
You're right. I believe you, and you're absolutely correct. I'm going to wear a mask in public.
But anyway, in terms of media, that's not actually what I'm recommending.
Okay.
I would like to recommend the Bob Dylan's "The Times They Are Changing" the album. That's actually a album
that came out last year, right?
No, it actually came out in probably 1967. Let me check that out. 1964.
I was about to say that was the summer of love, if you don't count all the race riots happening in the
67.
Yeah.
I thought 69 was.
Yeah, 69 was the summer of love.
Yeah, I bet.
I'm not even joking.
Yeah,
that's
no.
It's also the year that basically the idea of hippieism died.
Wait, guys, are we still making a joke about the number 69? Are you guys?
You were the only one who made that joke.
No, you made it.
No, I didn't. You're just immature.
I'm pretty sure we all made that joke at the same time.
All right.
So yeah,
it's a funny number. I'm thinking about it now.
Stop.
Okay.
I personally feel like this is the album where Bob Dylan's songwriting is at his highest point. I think especially his song with talking about, or his song with God on Our Side. He's talking about how from our own perspective we're always seeing God is on our side. Therefore, the enemy who is not with us, God is not on their side.
Yeah, everyone else is the brutal savage, and
exactly.
we are the righteous warrior for the cause. Yeah.
So God's on our side, and he will protect us through everything. And because we win, that means God's on our side.
Yeah.
And if we lose, it's because God's trying to teach us a lesson, I suppose.
Yeah.
He talks about the morality of all these different sides and different even individual people throughout history of questioning whether God was on their side or not. I just think that's I personally feel this is one of his most underrated albums.
Yeah,
it's really amazing
for sure.
That sounds awesome to me, man.
Yeah.
Jamison?
Oh, is it my turn?
Sure.
I'm not prepared. I'm not even holding the book I'm about to talk about. That's a lie. I am. This is Breakfast of Champions by Kurt Vonnegut. Is a book that changed me reading it. Changed what I thought about what a book could be. And that's my favorite thing a book can do, is just radically alter your, what you see as a book. And the thing is that the book is kind of about that, about how we write fiction. Because the book sums itself up within the first chapter. And then it keeps going for, 20-something more. And it is fantastic all the way through. And the way it's written, I don't want to spoil it for you, but I am going to read a section of it by Kurt Vonnegut that I have marked here, in which he kind of talks about his writing process in the book, which is a fiction book. That sometimes the author just starts talking to you about how he's writing these fictional characters.
That's very meta.
And that's only part of how weird the book gets. Because this is a weird book. It's also super funny. But this is a line that really stuck with me as I was reading it. Once I understood what was making America such a dangerous, unhappy nation of people who had nothing to do with real life, I resolved to shun storytelling. I would write about life. Every person would be exactly as important as any other. All facts would also be given equal weightness. Nothing would be left out. Let others bring order to chaos. I would bring chaos to order instead, which I think I have done. And then once I read that part of the book, it all clicked in. The way he writes this book is tangential. He just keeps going on tangent after tangent. And he'll introduce a minor character, but he doesn't treat them like a minor character. Suddenly, this chapter is dedicated to them and what's happening. So there is no protagonist necessarily. There's a case to be made for a character, Kilgore Trout, to be the main character, but it's not really that. The book jumps around from person to person to person. Everyone's given equal weight in an argument, and their struggle is given time. And that's interesting. There's no it is chaos that he's brought to order. You see the format of storytelling is beginning, middle, end. You have the charts of the rising action, the falling action. You have the 3-act structure, of how we're supposed to tell stories, and all of that is ignored in this story. Not necessarily ignored, but played around with. Because like I said, the book tells you how it ends within the first chapter, and then sums up what it says. And then once it's got its message out, it doesn't care anymore. It just does whatever it wants, and it's incredibly interesting to read. It also feels, for a book that was written or released in 1973, shockingly fresh. It feels like something I could have pulled off the shelf yesterday, and the ideas of it would have felt new and original. And that shocked me, because the stuff he talks about in this book, the social issues, the ideas of racism and classism and all this stuff, it feels true to today. And on top of all this fantastic stuff I've mentioned, the book is hilarious. It's one of the funniest things I've ever written, and it includes all these crude drawings by Kurt Vonnegut.
Yeah.
And some of them are very crude, in fact. Some would say obscene. But and some of the stuff he talks about is obscene. He plays around with literary tropes and how we talk about characters. And it's interesting. And
how would you say the title plays into the story itself?
It almost doesn't, but then another way it does. It has to do with some of the themes about advertising in the book, about how we process information as a populace, and that's kind of the main theme of the book, is how we tell stories. And this is a quote from the book. It's part of a drawing. It's on a character's tombstone, and it's my favorite quote of the entire book. "We are healthy only to the extent that our ideas are humane." And that's what the book is about giving humane ideas. But it's only partly about that. It's about so much. This book is a whirlwind of ideas. And because it is chaos to order, like he said in the book. And it is funny, and it is heartbreaking, and it is beautiful, and it is my favorite book now, until another book comes around and slaps it out. But it will always hold a place in my heart. And I love that about books. And also, this book came to me at a time when I was having trouble reading, because I just felt like I couldn't focus on anything. And maybe it was that broken, unstructured way in which he wrote the book that it worked with me. And it made me excited to read again. And I love that so much. I love it when a book can bring passion back into an activity that you felt like you had lost. So I owe Kurt Vonnegut that as well. I wouldn't say it's a perfect book, but I don't think it wants to be a perfect book. I think it just wants to be its own thing. And it was perfect for me. And I hope it's perfect for you. That's Breakfast of Champions. I love it. Isaac, I'm sorry if I monopolized this time.
That's perfect. No, that's awesome. Yeah. My recommendation is another album, which maybe it's a lot of music to listen to you've got here, but you're welcome.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that.
It is the album. It's the 2019 album Designer by Aldous Harding. Aldous Harding is a New Zealand singer-songwriter, and she kind of caught me by surprise. She's kind of one of those artists that you never knew existed, but then once you find them, everything they've ever done is incredible, right? Yeah. And I was kind of like, I heard one of her songs on the radio, or maybe it was just in passing at a coffee shop or something, and I was like, wow, that song is incredible. And I went back and listened to the album, and then every single song is just as good.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like so often you hear an awesome song and then you listen to the rest of the album and it's like just not quite on par. But every single song, like that song wasn't even the hit of the album, right? Yeah. It's like every single song is the same quality and is the same intentionality. So
that's how I feel about Simon and Garfunkel.
Sure. Yeah. So Aldous Harding. Yeah. So the song in particular that I love from this album is called The Barrel. And you may have heard this before. It's pretty popular. We're not going to play it now on the podcast, but I encourage you to pause it and listen to it and then come back. And we are actually
we're going to do that right now.
We're going to do that right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I'm excited to hear this.
There you go.
And we back.
There you go. Okay.
Well, I will say I didn't get to play my song. I'm a little upset about that.
Well, that happens.
I mean, we got time.
We don't have time. I'm afraid we're out of time.
No, we got time.
No, we don't have time.
We definitely have time.
I guess we don't have time.
I'm looking at the clock, Max,
no.
and we don't have time for us to pause and then play your song. I'm afraid not.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so The Barrel by Aldous Harding, I hope you just listen to it. I don't know, it's got this, like, it's very cozy, like, it's very unoffensive, but it's also very bold. You know what I mean? Like, it is very, like, quietly unique in a way that is very attractive to me. And it's just something that, you know, like I love like the Talking Heads and LCD Sound System and like really loud, really weird stuff. But stuff like this is really refreshing a lot of the time because it's like I said, it's cozy.
You said it was inoffensive, but I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with something being like inoffensive. People act like if art doesn't slap you upside the head that it's bad for some reason or that it's not taking a risk. But any kind of expression is a risk on your part of putting yourself out there. I don't think it should be lesser than or...
And to a degree, like, being not offensive is almost offensive to a degree. To some people, because it's just like, I'm not offended by this, and that offends me.
Yeah, for sure. So, that whole album, like I mentioned, that whole album is the same vibe. I mean, if you hated that song, then you won't like the album. But if you did, then I mean, the whole album is just as good. So I'll go back and listen to Designer by Aldous Harding.
I think we all will.
Woot.
Designer by
Aldous Harding.
2019.
And we have, what was your album and that song, Max?
With God on Their Side by Bob Dylan.
And the album?
Times Are Changing.
The Times They Are Changing.
Okay. And my book...
It's not they are changing, it's they are a-changing.
Right. Grammar be darned. And my book was Breakfast of Champions by Kurt Vonnegut. Thank you for listening. Right, guys?
Yep.
Yeah.
And we have an email address. So if you have any questions, if you have any recommendations, if you have any podcast ideas, any tangents you want us to go on, you can go to thetangentcast@gmail.com and you can email us any of that. And then we also have a phone number, and you can drop us a voicemail with any questions, concerns, interesting facts, whatever you want us to talk about.
And there's a chance we might play it on the podcast if we like it. If we like what you have to say. That number is 479-339-9041. Once again, 479-339-9041.
And if you don't want us to play your voice on the podcast, that's totally fine. Just let us know.
Yeah, say that in the voicemail.
Yeah. And thanks for listening along.
This whole episode was about identity. And we found ourselves a name that we all like. But this is the beginning. Because
this is the beginning.
Yeah, the beginning.
Beginning.
Whatever.
Beginning.
Thank you. Finding yourself, working out what you are and who you are, if you're a person or a podcast, is a process. It is slow, and for most of us, it takes a lifetime. I don't think we're going to stop just because this episode is over or just because we reach a point where we feel comfortable. We're going to keep experimenting and changing because that's what life is. It's learning, and that's what this podcast will be. And along the way, you know, I hope we can talk about some fun stuff. And thank you for listening, and I hope that you can be a part of that as well. And I'm your dad.
Tune in next time for when we talk about turning McChickens into a currency.
We're probably not going to do that.
Hi there, this is Tangent. Leave a message after the beep. No, that's... No. Oh my God. You guys want to re-record that?